Hello, everyone, and Happy New Year to 2025. Well, I have to say, I watched a lot of videos over the Christmas and New Year break. A lot of videos from relatively young people, my age, so in their 20s, 30s, early 40s, that is, young British people who are either considering moving abroad or who had moved abroad. And there seemed to be an increasing number of young people leaving the country. I mean, British born people whose families are from Britain. And some of these may be temporary. A lot of people, for example, taking advantage of the young people visa moving to Australia, which was recently extended to everyone up to the age of 35. But some people who moved to countries abroad and decided to settle there permanently. Some of you might know my family is Polish, and a couple of years ago I started the process of applying for Polish citizenship. It took them about a year, but I finally got Polish citizenship. It was about a year ago. I got a certificate from the Polish authority, and I'm now applying for a Polish passport. And whereas I'm not planning to leave the UK in the immediate future, it's something that I'm considering. And so watching young people talking about leaving the UK, I felt that I was, or I am, on the same wavelength as many of them. The key things that came up a lot were, first of all, the cost of living, that it's very expensive in the UK, particularly rent. I'm fortunate enough to be a homeowner, but rental prices are very high in the UK. Wages are more or less stagnant for many people. Wages haven't really increased at all, really, for the last 10, 15 years, especially when you account for inflation. And obviously, energy prices. The UK now has the highest energy prices anywhere in the world. No thanks to the net zero agenda of our government, and perhaps to a small extent, problems with the Ukraine-Russia conflict. And then that's the cost of living, economic factors. But there's also, and this is something else that came up a lot, cultural fragmentation. People feeling that the UK is an increasingly depressing place, an increasingly soulless place, and a place that no longer feels the same way as it used to. It no longer feels like home in the same way to many people. I watched a video, a girl who's moved out to Hong Kong called Educate as her YouTube channel. She was talking about having grown up being told that you live in one of the best countries in the world. And that might have been the case. But she said, well, I've traveled very broadly around the world, and actually I found that I don't believe that is still true. I don't believe that the UK is one of the best countries in the world to live in. And then, of course, there's the weather. So the UK is further north than many people realize. London is at the same latitude, roughly, as parts of Canada. Winnipeg, Calgary, roughly 51.5 degrees north. And because of that, we don't receive much sunlight, relatively speaking. If you compare the sunlight exposure people living in the UK and much of Northern Europe, of course, to that of the US, most of the US receives a vastly more amount of sunlight, and that means their vitamin D exposure is that much greater. And of course, we can take vitamin D supplementation, and I really strongly recommend to everybody to do that, because obviously it helps with boosting immunity, it helps with bone growth and muscle development, and so many other things. But of course, our bodies can't produce vitamin D, so we have to get it from sunlight exposure, or we have to take vitamin D supplementation. So all these factors combining means that many people have moved abroad. But there's one other very interesting factor, and I'm just going to talk briefly about this because I think it's something that everybody's aware of, and it sort of gnaws away in the background in the UK, but no one really talks about it, other than perhaps in a political context in terms of the class war. And of course, I mean the class system. The class system is embedded, I think it's fair to say, deeply rooted in Britain and British culture. And I think it's obviously dates back to royalty, the aristocracy, and the landed gentry, and then the peasant classes. So that the strata, the different tastes of society. But obviously no longer exist in that same way. There still are a few aristocrats and wealthy landowners, but society is a lot more mobile. But those divisions still persist. Whereas many people who class themselves as working class, or their families as working class, actually they're a lot wealthier than a lot of so-called middle class people who self-identify as, if you like, as middle class, because they work in very profitable trades such as plumbing and electricians, builders and so forth. So that class system persists, but in a sort of cultural realm, and it's visible in terms of people's accents, about their associations, what kind of social events they go to, what towns they live in, and the type of people and interests that they have. I have to say that I've always found this class system extremely problematic, and if I'm very brutally honest, unpleasant. I greatly dislike it instinctively, because although I grew up in the UK, my family's Polish, I'm capable of taking a step back and looking at the UK from a quasi-external perspective. And so it's more noticeable how this class system can create problems. I think it creates unnecessary divisions. I've always made a point of being friendly to people regardless of their class background. I think it's actually very important to have a diverse range of friends to get different perspectives on things. But I'm going to say one more thing, because there has been a lot of news in the last few days regarding Elon Musk and the leader of a political party in the UK. And I don't want to sort of name names, but I'm going to make one observation, which is that I think Americans find it a lot harder to understand those class divisions because, like many continental Europeans, they don't have that in the same extent. And so it's much less obvious to Americans why certain individuals should be persona non grata. I think if we take a step back and start to value people more on their merit, we might think of them, in other words, on what they do, on what they say, rather than necessarily the accent that they have or how they say it. We might start to break down those barriers between us and people who are really on the same side as us and allied in our good fight. I think I'm going to leave it there, but hopefully I've been giving that a lot of thought over the last few days, and I felt I needed to express it. But thank you for listening, and hopefully see you again soon at the next episode of Recent Heretic.